Matt, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I want to dive right in. You talk often on your Instagram account about self-talk. So just tell us a little bit about why self-talk is important to you.
I think it's important to me and important to, hockey players and athletes because the stories we tell ourselves and the thoughts we have end up leading into the actions that we take. And so if we're walking around with negative thoughts, negative stories, negativity in general, it's going to lead into the actions we take every single day, which is ultimately going to lead into the results that we're getting. And so I find that hockey players, especially when they're having that poor me, why me attitude, and they're telling themselves a tough story, it's not really motivating them to get out of bed and train every day or putting the work they have to put in. And so that's why I feel like it's so important. And then leading into games and practices and everything like that, you want to be getting yourself in the right frame of mind to be getting yourself the right results. And so I think everything kind of starts in the mind with those thoughts, that lead to the actions, and those actions are going to lead to the results.
For sure. How are you promoting like the positive self-talk? So one thing I'm interested in is like, do you have to like obviously having a positive internal kind of monologue with yourself is super important. You don't want it to go negative, but everyone's going to kind of fluctuate between that positive, negative. And I think it's especially hard to be positive when you don't already have the skill set. So is self-talk to you like do you have to believe the things that you're saying to yourself? So for example, like it's pretty easy for a player to just be like, I'm going to play in the NHL one day, or they're like, that's their internal monologue. But if they don't truly believe that, like in their heart of hearts, then is the self talk even really helping them in a way?
I would say at first you don't have to believe it. I was thinking about this beforehand. I think it's if you're starting to work on your shot or you're starting to try to get stronger in the gym, you're going to suck at first. You're going to be weak. Your shot's not going to be good. And so when the self talk, it's a practice. And a lot of players will come into this with no idea that the self talk is even happening. I look back at my hockey career, junior, pro, all of it. I didn't even understand there was an internal dialogue going on. And I certainly didn't understand that it was negative. And so I think the first step to doing anything when it comes to this is just to do it. And whether you believe it or not, to me, is irrelevant because over time, when that self talk becomes more positive, your actions are going to become more positive. Your results are then going to become more positive, and then you're going to start to get that deeper level of self belief. So for me, I think that's how it's going to work.
For
So
sure.
no, to questions, I don't think it's important.
No, I love that. And I think what you said there about just doing the thing, I think nowadays, like, too many people are like paralysis by analysis. They kind of get caught up in just like, I need all the answers before I start. When in reality, just start the thing and you'll get the answers because you're going to suck and you'll figure them out pretty quick. It's the same when I started this podcast. I'm by no means like good at it, but this is the 10th episode. From episode one to now, like I've gotten so much better just in my ability to communicate with people and not say the ums and the ahs. And those things were like things I was worried about, but like I've just figured them out as they go. Are
Yeah.
you are you giving tactics to athletes like if they're in that positive mindset, like obviously it's easy to slip down a negative rabbit hole, especially if things are going bad for you. Are you giving them any sort of tactics to kind of get them back into that positive mind frame?
Yeah, I wanted just to go back to one thing you said about getting started and figuring it out before I dive into that. A couple things on that. I did one coaching call with a group of players once, and one of the guys that I've worked with me, he said something that stuck with me and stuck with everybody else. He said, just get started. Like, just don't worry about if it's going to work. Everybody wants to know, Matt, is this going to work? If I do this program, if I do this stuff, is it going to work? If you're working on yourself, it's working. It's really that simple. And a note I made
Right.
there for talking about your story, because I kind of got goosebumps. I see a lot of like almost myself and you because I used to do this podcast thing as well. But the answers are in the work. I think
Right.
that's one thing players are missing because my Instagram DMs are flooded with questions, and a lot of them are just like, once again, people wanting you to try to walk them through the entire process for them, but
Hmm.
you can't do that because all the answers are in the work that you have to do yourself. And I'm
Right.
slowly but surely getting to the other side of that because I've done a lot of work. I still have a lot of work to go, but just looking back, a lot of the answers that I found are in the work. And so I wanted to hit that real quick. And then in terms of strategies, was it like to get out of the negative mindset? Was that what you were getting at?
Yeah, just kind of like if a player starts spiraling, like I know self-talk, in even like me knowing it's important to be positive and like you're your own worst critic, right? And so you want your
Yeah.
internal voice to be positive, but it can't be that way all the time, right? Sometimes you're going to slip down the negative. So, is there any strategies in particular that you're giving athletes to just make sure that they're bringing it back into the positive end?
Yeah, 100%. I think the first strategy you need to have and need to be practicing is cultivating that practice of self-awareness. So it's always going to be step one. Like I said about my career, I didn't even know it was happening. Most players don't even know it's happening. And so that's why when players start to work on their mental game, this gap starts to get created between them and everybody else because they're aware of it, they can catch it, they can stop it, where everybody else is kind of just going back into that negativity loop and staying stuck down there. So the first step, be aware of it. The second step, and maybe a strategy or an exercise you could do, is to take some time and sit with your thoughts. Have a couple of deep breaths, close your eyes, meditate, so to speak. And then every time that negative thought comes up, take a beat and write it down. Write it down on a piece of paper and make an entire list of every negative self-talk thought you have, every limiting self-belief. And when you're done, take a look at that list and take some time to cross every one of them out and do what I like to call a positive rewrite. So if you're sitting there thinking, I'm not good enough, I can't make this team, you write that down. And when you're done, you cross it off, you change that negative into a positive, you rinse and repeat that process. And over time, what I found for myself in particular is that I'm able to catch that right away. I'm able to
That's
say, hey,
awesome.
that's actually not true about yourself. And even
Yeah.
if it is, it's like that's where the work is now, right? That negativity, there might be some truth in that. And so that's what you have to kind of dive into and be like, all right, is that actually truth? And if it is, what are we going to do about it?
No, I love that. That's actually a great strategy to bring them out and write them down because like you say, you're gonna have those negative thoughts. They just happen, but bringing them into the light really shows you like, and especially writing them down. And if you write them down over days, if you journal or whatever, like you can start to see this pattern of like, why do I think about this every day? And then like you said, that's the work now, right? If you're constantly being like, I'm not good enough, well then like why aren't you good enough? So that's actually a great strategy to write them down. And I always think of like I'm a huge golfer, and golf I find is one of the easiest sports to just like you hit a bad shot and now you're just in your head and you can ruin the whole like hole or the whole front nine because you hit one bad shot on hole three, right? And it's like so I struggled with that for so long when I started golfing of like how do you just like okay the most important shot's the next shot, and I dug into some like Tiger Woods stuff, and he talks about he has this 10-second rule where if he hits a bad shot, he gets 10 seconds to be pissed off about it, hit the ground, whatever, hit his bag, whatever he needs to do. And then he has a reset routine where he like, unstraps his glove, straps it back up. And that's his like cue to be like, all right, we're back into the positive. So that's actually a great strategy.
I love that. And just to dive into the golf thing a little bit, because I was a big golfer as a kid, played a lot of tournament golf. And funny story, I always tell this story about my father-in-law. But when I was a kid, I'd always go out there to play golf, and I'd want to shoot 79. I'd want to break 80. But if I made a double on the first hole, it's like, oh, well, I'm screwed now. I can't break 80, and the whole round's over. I got to do this on the next hole. And I got into this what if and what I have to do. And it was this whole thing, right? Like I was out of the game after the first hole. And now I play golf. And if I do, I play with my father-in-law, who's like an avid golfer, new putter every week, different grip. He's reading all the books, all the magazines, he's doing all the things. I go out there, no shirt, no shoes, barefoot, don't care, and never play. And I beat him, and he's furious. He can't, he's beside himself. It's like, you play once a year. I play every day. You're going to come out and beat me like that? I'm like, yeah, I just don't care. I'm just doing it
Yeah.
for fun. I appreciate being outside, and I appreciate golfing for golfing and not trying to shoot a number. And that's why I talk with players a lot about the points thing. It's like the more you hammer on having to score a certain amount of points, the more that pressure comes on top of you. And I love the golf kind of world in terms of the mindset stuff. And, Tiger takes full advantage of those 10 seconds. But yeah,
Right.
that's a great rule to have.
No, that I want to touch on that a little bit about expectations because like you just kind of pointed out there, you can kind of get in your way most of the time, right? If like you go out
Mhm.
there and like you said, you had that number in your head and then things don't go according to plan, now you're just in this downward spiral. How do you approach that with players in terms of like setting expectations? Because obviously you don't want to set a goal or an expectation that you can achieve because then you're not going to really try hard, right? But you also
Mhm.
don't want to go out like I'm going to score 5 goals this game and you score none and now you're in a slump. So how do you approach setting expectations and setting realistic expectations for players?
So I always tell players to focus on the preparation more than the expectation. And then if you're going to have some type of an expectation, try to work back from that 5 goal total and ask yourself, like, what are you going to do to get there? And what are the controllables with inside of that? And that's where I like to get them to put all of their time and all of their attention. And I hear from players all the time that'll go from having a 5 goal year to a 20 goal year. I worked with a guy this year who scored 20 goals in 23 games in the USHL, and all we kind of did was getting him away from that goal focus. The more he stopped focusing on scoring goals, the more he started scoring goals. And
Right.
so focusing on the preparation, not the expectation. And then if you do have an expectation of yourself, it's to do the things that lead to the points. Shoot
Right.
200 pucks a day, go on early, stay on late, work on your mental game. It's like do all those things because that's what's going to lead you to getting there.
Yeah, that's a good nugget for players to hang on to there. I always tell our athletes that competence breeds confidence, right? Like the
Yeah,
players that are confident are the players that have put themselves in that situation. So like you said, you know you can pick that top corner because you've shot 200 pucks a day for the last year. Like you know in your heart of hearts that you can do that. And so I love that. And then the aspect of reverse engineering it. Like everything in my life when I first started as in strength and conditioning, I was so overwhelmed when I started getting like bigger athletes, junior athletes, pro athletes, and I was like, I don't want to mess these guys' careers up. Like, how am I going to program for these? When in reality, it's the same as it is for a youth
yeah,
athlete. You start with the end goal. What are we trying to do? Like, what's our goal for the end of the summer? And then we just reverse engineer it to where we are now, and we bridge that gap. So I love that tactic. When it comes to low hanging fruit, so we talked about self talk, and I think
yeah.
is that a place that you start with most players?
I think so. That or visualization. I think being aware of your thoughts is a really good place to start. Simple breathing techniques, just learning the practices, the tools. It's like anything else. I think players overthink the mental game, but they have to understand that it is just like shooting, skating, passing, lifting. It's a skill, and there's tools to use. But it's deep though. Like it goes so deep. It's hard to really understand how deep it goes until you get into it.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're
No.
going into like years of your own subconscious mind and subconscious programming, and everyone's working on autopilot, and they're working on things they've learned from their parents that didn't even realize they were learning. And so there's an unlearning process, and there's a lot going on. So the simplest place is to be like, what are you saying to yourself? Because your coach might be all over you, your buddies are probably all over you. If you have buddies like I had back in the day, your parents might be all over you. It's like you can't also be all over you on top of that, or else
Yeah.
you're in trouble.
Yeah, you can't be your own worst critic. I love that. Now I'm all about like the lowest hanging fruit for kids and athletes. It's
Yeah,
just like what's the thing if we change right now that you're gonna immediately see results. So I love that just being able to, be your own best critic. You know what I mean? Like you
yeah,
want to be your own hype man, so to speak. Because like
100%.
like I noticed you posted something and like touching on what you just said there about like just starting the process and just being able to start recognizing those thoughts. I noticed you posted something on your Instagram yesterday or the day before from a 5-star QB recruit talking about like if you shouldn't start working with a mental coach when shit hits the fan. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing with anything. Like you shouldn't start lifting when you go out on the ice and you realize that you're getting pushed around. Like you should have started that last year. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing in the mental world that like don't start working on this once shit hits the fan. You have to be proactive about this and work on it proactively leading up to that. So when shit does hit the fan, you're prepared to deal with it, right?
Yeah, and I think the best players have that level of awareness, but most people don't. I know I didn't. The only change I ever made in my life was through pain, which is unfortunate. Which is why I kind of started doing what I'm doing to just have players realize like, don't wait till you're 300 yards in the hole to start trying to dig yourself. Start getting that good foundation right now because once you start to have those setbacks, you'll know how to handle them. Like I
Yeah.
never knew how to handle them in my pro career when I went through hard times. I didn't have a clue. I've never gone through them before.
Yeah.
Like real hard times. I've always obviously had slumps and whatnot, but if you don't have the tools, it's going to be tough to know what to do.
For sure. Yeah, you need something to fall back on and something that's going to bring you back to, and set you back to square one, right? And get your
Yeah.
mind kind of back in there and dialed. I want to touch on that a little bit with how you kind of approach players who have a change in identity. So we kind of spoke about this before with like say a player is, Pee Wee Bantam, they're the best player on their team. They're the star, right? Then all of a sudden they get drafted, they're going to go play in the Q or they're going to go play in the CHL somewhere, wherever it may be. Now all of a sudden they're a role player. They're not the star
Yeah.
anymore. They're a third liner. And now their whole like sense of identity has kind of been destroyed, right? They used to be the star, now they're a role player. They have to figure out where they fit on the team. How in your experience have players dealt with that, and how are you teaching them to deal with kind of the change in their role, so to speak?
Well, right now I look at a good example of that being John Tavares with the Leafs, who's now playing on the third line. I live in Western Canada, but still, it's just nonstop Leaf content where I'm from. But you have to adapt to it and try to make the most out of it, right? You have to see the upside. And one of the guys was saying last night that like now you're playing against the other team's third line, so now you have an opportunity to go out there and maybe get more shots up, be more offensive, do more things. And he has been playing well. And so I think number one, you have to adapt to the situation you're in. That's hockey. So you could ask yourself the question like, what is the game asking of me right now? What is the team asking of me right now? I know I want to be this, that, or the other thing, but what is the game asking of me? And it might be asking of you to dig in and get better. It might be asking of you to play a defensive role. Maybe you got to think outside of yourself for 2 seconds, which is hard to do. So that's one question I get guys to ask themselves. And then if they want to start to move up the lineup, if you want to be a first liner, second liner, PP guy, PP girl, whatever, you got to start to act as if you're that player right now today. I think a lot of people wish for it more than they're willing to work for it. And so, like, when you show up to practice as a third liner, you better have a mindset of like, what's that first line guy doing? What's that power play line guy? Like, how am I going to move up to get there? You got to become a different player if you want a different role, a different identity.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you like, so this is another question I had for you in terms of like, it kind of goes along the same vein of like the fake it till you make it. And you were talking about how you don't necessarily need to believe in the things that you're telling yourself, you just need to get to work. And so how kind of, if you don't have the skills right now, so you want to move up in the lineup, but right now you're a third liner and you don't have the skills to be on the first line. How are you setting that belief in your own brain of like, okay, I can be a first liner, even though you don't necessarily have the skills to accomplish that at the moment?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually have a great example of this. I was working with a guy this year. He's playing in the BCHL, and I think he was new to the team, so he was kind of like a seventh defenseman in the lineup. But he saw himself as a top four, specialty teams guy. But at that point in time, the coaches didn't see him as that. And so I thought about it like this: instead of trying to go from like the seventh D spot to the third, we got to get the coach's trust, right? We got to get in the lineup. We got to be a regular. And so there's baby steps to the process, right? And so seeing yourself maybe at that next, I don't know, 1 to 2 steps down the road, that's the most important thing. Because if you see yourself as the top guy, top dog, and you ain't, you're not going to feel that good about yourself. But if you go from being a healthy scratch and not having the coach's trust and now being in the lineup to playing a regular shift, coaches patting you on the back, now we're moving up in the world. Now we're building that confidence cycle that we're looking for. So that's how I would approach it. We can't
Yeah.
go like that all or nothing mentality is what a lot of players have.
Yeah, and that's great advice. Like it comes back right back to what we were talking about with reverse engineering it. Like we have this overarching goal that we
Yeah.
want, right? And it's important that that's your North Star. That's what you're going for. But it's definitely important. You have to break that down into, okay, so what's the next logical step? Like what does success look like here? Like what's a step in the positive direction? So I like that chunking it down into those mini goals just to kind of make sure that you're seeing progress and you're keeping yourself motivated. So that's a great advice. When it
Yeah. I have, one more thing. I have all these players in my program go through this goal setting worksheet. I wish I had it in front of me, but it's essentially that. It's like you want to play major junior. Okay, like what's the step to major junior? Okay, maybe it's midget AAA, whatever. So what's the step to that? What's the step to that? What do we have to do to get there? And when you can start, like you said, chunking it down and taking it bite by bite, it's a lot easier to kind of break down and figure out. Right? A
yeah,
lot of guys, they one thing people miss, and I missed myself, was really understanding what it took. I think that's a big separator as well. Like I wanted to play in the Western League, but when I went to Western Hockey League tryouts, I mean, this was the Western League. This was me. I wasn't close. I didn't
yeah.
get it. And so understanding what it takes is a really big first step as well.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Just like, yeah, like you say, understanding that you may be further off than you think, and but it comes back to the only way to figure that out is to get in the mix, right? Like
Yeah,
you got to get in
100%.
there and figure that out. That's awesome. So I've talked about this. You're the first mental kind of performance coach I've had on. So I talk about this a lot from like a skill development. The game is so fast, it's so skillful now. And there's very like minute ways that you can separate yourself as a player in the skill department, right? Because you're either skilled or you're not. You're a playmaker or you're not. So for a guy that's maybe not as skilled, how can they gain a mental edge on their competition? Like what are the mental things that they can be doing that maybe the skill guys aren't, that they can kind of help to bring themselves into the light, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a word, but I'm going to go with bounce back ability. So being able to bounce back from a negative or making a mistake and playing a full 60 minutes. I think playing a full 60 minutes is such an important thing for players to be able to do because, like we used the golf analogy earlier, you can't mess up that first shift and have it affect the rest of your game. Like, that's ridiculous when you really think about it. I mean, I did that all the time. Make a mistake early. Now I'm in my head. You got to be able to get back to the bench, reset 10 seconds of being pissed off, and getting yourself back in the game. That's number one. Number two, you got to be able to be positive and have high energy for the entire game. That's 1000% in your control. One of the most popular videos I ever shared about tryouts was just like telling people to show up, be positive, bring good energy, be a good teammate. That's it. And people are like, oh my God, what great advice. But I mean, it's not rocket science at the end of the day, but it is hard to do in a competitive sport. You know, that can be very negative. Coaches can be hard on you, teammate, you know how it goes. So, I mean, those are a couple things that I would focus on right there. And I see it all the time, even at the NHL level, you know. I talk about Austin Matthews all the time, and I feel like that's a guy that's just lasered in for 60 minutes. He's not chirping the other team. He's not yelling at the ref. He's not yelling at his teammates. He's just locked in for 60. And so if you're ready for the next chance and you're laser focused and present, it's going to give you a better opportunity to put that puck in the back of the net as opposed to thinking about the last one, having bad body language. Maybe you're super tense. It all matters. Everything matters.
No, for sure. I like for my strategy with golf at least is I always tell myself you hit a bad shot. My inner monologue is always the most important shot's the next shot, right? Like
Yeah.
that shot already happened. Like you don't. There's no point in dwelling on it. You can't control it now. So focus in on the moment. Control the controllables. Most important shift is the next shift. The most important moment's the next moment. So, and I find players in general, like I know I had this when I played hockey. When I play any sport or even in any like social setting, you have this kind of like spotlight effect, right? Where
Mhm.
you think everyone in the stands, so you're playing in front of 10,000 people, you think everyone in the stands is watching you when, you know, they're watching their favorite player, they're watching the other bench, they're looking at the bombshell that's in the third row. Like, you know what I mean? No one's even paying attention to you, but everyone in their own head is like, man, I made that mistake. Now everyone in here thinks I'm an idiot. And so you just get so caught up in this vicious cycle of like, man, everyone's paying attention to me when it's really just not the case.
Yeah, nobody cares. You know, everyone's thinking about themselves just like you are. And
No,
it's
exactly right.
hard to realize that, but like I saw a great video on that years ago that just nobody really cares. Do what you got to do, play your game, make your mistakes, learn your lessons, do your podcast, fuck it up 1,000 times. No one cares. They really
Nobody
don't. They're just
cares.
worried about their own stuff at the end of the day.
No, that's right. I'm not sure if you're familiar. If you're a big reader, I know you have a bunch of books behind you. There's a author, Morgan Housel, who I really like a lot of his stuff. And in his book, The Psychology of Money, he talks about this story where he used to be like a valet at like a fancy hotel, and he makes this analogy to point out that nobody cares about you, nobody's thinking about you, because he said when a guy would come in a nice Lamborghini and he's really well dressed, his first thought in his brain was never, look at how cool that guy is in the Lamborghini. His first thought is, man, how cool would I look if I drove that Lamborghini? Right.
Yeah.
And so he kind of pointed out that like everybody's doing that. Nobody's thinking about you because everybody's thinking about themselves. And that really helped me move past that thought that everyone is concerned about you, when in
Mhm.
reality, everyone's concerned about themselves. So nobody's thinking about you at all.
I think even in today's world, it's even more so because everything's so busy and there's so much information. It's like I'm almost convinced I could do the most ridiculous thing, post on Instagram, the wildest thing ever. And yeah, people would react like, that's really weird. Matt did that. The next day, just go back to doing my same thing. People just, they wouldn't even notice, you know?
No, they
Uh,
forget. Yeah.
they would.
And the world is so like attention driven now, and attention spans are so short that even if you did
Yeah.
mess up, you did something dumb, people are going to forget about it in literally like an hour. So, like,
Well,
tell
they
me
were
what you had
talking,
for breakfast last Thursday. You
yeah.
know what I mean? You probably can't remember. So nobody
They were,
remembers what you did last game.
they were talking about that yesterday on I watched a show called Overdrive from time to time on TSN. They're saying how like the Corey Perry story was the biggest story of all time. Where everyone's like, he'll never move past it. He's done forever, and it's like he's back playing. They're just asking him hockey questions, and it's like,
Right.
it's like how does that happen? It's crazy to me, but that's how it works.
Yeah, no, it is. You just touched on the NHL there. I had this question for a skill guy that I had on a few weeks ago when I was talking about, we talked about youth now and how they don't really seemingly any of the youth athletes that I have seemingly don't watch NHL games. They're all about like the highlights and stuff now, which is awesome. Watch the highlights, do whatever you need to do. Personally, I love just sitting down and watching a game, and I think players can get a lot from just sitting down and watching an NHL game from a skill standpoint, from a a system standpoint, watching how people find soft ice and that sort of thing. So from a skill standpoint, I think it's super easy for a player, not super easy, but like it's a little bit easier for them to grasp onto what they should be looking for. Pick a player on the ice and watch him move around for his shift, see how he moves, see where he goes, the plays he kind of makes, and you can use that as kind of a video session while you're watching an NHL game. From a mental aspect, how can like younger athletes who are watching NHL games kind of use that as a video session from a mental standpoint? So like what are the intangibles that they should be looking for in players? You already mentioned with Austin Matthews about his body language and those sorts of things. So what are the sort of things that you think or you would suggest that players are looking for when they're watching an NHL game?
Well, I would recommend they do the exact same thing you just mentioned, and then add that into their visualization routine. So a lot of players will come to me, they'll say things like, "Matt, I can't get the puck out on the wall. I don't know what to do on the breakout." All right, well, let's watch whoever, Tyler Bertuzzi, as a Leafs player. What is he doing to get the puck out? What are his movement patterns look like when he's in the D zone? How's he breaking out? What are his feet doing? What's he doing on the wall? All those little things, and visualize yourself doing the exact same thing. So if you are watching hockey, find the guy or girl that you like to watch that plays a similar position, similar style, and just start to mirror their behavior and the patterns they're taking throughout the game. It's really that simple. And I think even for myself, when I see a goal go in, I like to rewind it a couple times and see how that goal happened, how it broke down, how it's set up from the offensive side of the puck, and how can you add that, to a visualization session, and that could be your practice for the night.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the like looking at the game within the game. Like as a fan of the game and having played hockey, like I listened to this podcast the other day, and they were talking about Rick Tocchet and the kind of the job he's done in Vancouver this year, and they were talking about how he's on or he was on TNT before he got that job, and they were talking about how in kind of like when they watch the games, like the TNT analysts or whatever, when they watch the games, everyone would watch the goal and they're preparing for the intermission or whatever, and everyone would watch the goal and they see it for the highlight or for the play that it
Mm-hmm.
was, and then Tockett's always like shaking his head because in his head he's like got the coaching hat on, right? He saw the breakdown that led to the goal, so he's upset on the defensive side of like why'd they let that happen, you know what I mean? He was out of
Yeah.
position. So I like that, just looking at the game within the game, right?
Yeah, because there's like anything, there's steps to the process.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so yeah, you
Like
have to
I like to see. There's a goal the other night. Sorry to cut you off.
no,
There's
no.
I mean the same goal Matthew scores all the time. There's a bunch of chaos in the middle. He kind of breaks off to the side, open ice. Marner just takes time, finds space, and just waits and waits and waits and gets in that puck. I mean, you look on the defensive side of the puck. I can't believe five guys can come back and he can be that open. But I love to see Matthews just kind of cruise in, take it. Like I like to see that all breaking down and playing out, because a lot of the younger players, they have that like go go go. I got to work harder. I got to go faster. You know what I mean? But these guys are just they're kind of playing chess when everyone else is playing checkers, which it's a beautiful thing when it works out like that.
No, that's right. And I think how you get to the point, or how you get to the point of playing chess and not checkers is you have to understand the why. Like you can
Yeah.
see the goal for what it is, you can appreciate what a great shot, what a great play that he made, but understanding why he was even in that position in the first place. Like I always, from a strength and conditioning perspective, athletes will come to me all the time with this like fancy exercise that they saw on Instagram, and they're like, "Oh, Connor McDavid does this exercise. Is that why he's so fast?" And I'm like, "No, like no one exercise is why he is the way he is." Like, so you can't just be going in and throwing exercises in like willy-nilly into your program without understanding why you're applying them to the body. Like he doesn't do
Mhm.
that. Like that's not the reason he's fast. The reason he's fast is because he has a well-built program that's structured to make him fast. You know what I mean? There's a why behind those exercises. It's not
Mhm.
the exercises that made the player, right?
Yeah, it's like I deal with on Instagram. I deal with a lot of players reaching out. Hey, do you have any confidence tips? And I'm always like, well, I got 3,700 posts on my page about confidence, so there's a lot of tips in there. But for me to just give you a confidence tip with no information or no context as to where you're at, it's very difficult, right?
Right.
Because your confidence might be lacking for this reason or that reason. Same with Connor McDavid. His strength and his speed is for this reason. There's all these different layers that go into it. And I think at the end of the day, for some low hanging fruit for players right now, a lot of this is reps. Like I'm
Yeah.
big on the idea of just reps. They want to be good intentional reps. And if you're doing strength stuff, having a strength coach is the best way to go about that. But everything comes down to reps at the end of the day, in my opinion, or a lot of it does. Connor McDavid's the fastest guy on the ice because there's a good chance he's putting more reps than anybody else. He might have some more natural ability as well. But I promise you, there's a guy out there right now with just as much natural ability as Connor who just didn't put in the reps.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. I'm a big believer in reps, in that you can truly build or develop whatever skill you want
Totally.
in life, right? If you just put in the reps. Like I've pointed to Connor Bedard on my page quite a bit. Everyone is enamored by his shot. And when you look into how he grew up, like there was a portion in minor hockey, there's a story, like a little documentary that I watched, that he broke his wrist in minor hockey, and they said it was like right at the growth plate. So they were like, if you like don't recover like fully, like there's a chance that this is gonna fuck your wrist up and you could like not play hockey again. So
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't want to ruin his routine of taking however many hundreds of shots he took every day. So he just started taking shots with his top hand, right, and just not using his other hand. And now everyone points to that is like that's why his release is unbelievable, because for like 6 months, all he did was take 100 shots a day with his top hand, right? And so now he's got this unbelievable release, and it literally just came down to reps. Like he just wouldn't stop putting the reps in, and he found a way to make it happen, right?
Yeah, I just feel like that's a great story. Players just have to get this point. Like I'm no Zoom call podcast expert, but I can tell you right now, like this stuff like this doesn't make me nervous. Where it used to make me pour sweat and like almost faint before doing them. But guess what the difference is? I've done hundreds of these,
Yeah.
like literally hundreds of them, and it's like you turn yourself into the person you want to be by showing up every single day and honing that craft. I mean, it's kind of like the concept behind every book on the planet, but it's just if until you truly get that, you don't get the power within it.
No, you're right. Like you can extrapolate it to anything. Like when I look back,
Yes.
it was funny. I looked back the other day. I've had my Instagram page for like 3 years, and I looked back to like one of the first like 5 posts I made, and
Oh,
it was
bro.
horrendous.
Horrendous.
Horrendous. The angles were all weird, camera quality was shit, the words weren't even on the screen. And like I say, I'm by no means an expert in Instagram or social or anything, but I'm light years from where I used to be. And it's simply because I posted every day for the last 3 years, and I've tried to improve something every day, right? And so it's just literally just putting in the reps. So I think that's a great point, and I know we've kind of beat it to death here, but it, like to your point, it is really important for players to get to the player or the person you want to be. It's just doing the work day in day out, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, just layering on top of that a little bit. If there's anyone out there struggling with their own confidence and thinking they're not getting anywhere, one exercise I do with myself and have players do is kind of what you just did there is do the look back. Like
Yeah.
where were you 6 months, a year ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Because I'm pretty sure you've probably gone from like there to here. And if you can go from there to here, you can go from here to wherever the hell you want to go next. It's
Yeah.
that works. It's like you've broken through that plateau before, you can do it again.
No, that's for sure. There's a great quote from, I mean, Jordan Peterson. He's kind of a controversial guy, but he has a great quote in his book 12 Rules for Life that is, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And
Totally.
so just like looking back and just seeing, like appreciating how far you've actually come on your goals, right? When you're getting beat down and you're like, fuck, I suck at this. Just looking back to like when you really sucked at it is like a pretty good
Yeah.
way to frame yourself in a positive mindset, right?
Yeah, because it's crazy to do that. I shared a clip once of this pro guy I work with. He's an unbelievable skater, dynamic, one of the best defensemen in the world in terms of skating, in my opinion. And some young kids like, I could never do that. Well, no, you're 14, 15 years old. He's 28 years old. It's like,
Yeah.
if you dedicated yourself to doing that for the next 10 years, I promise you could do that.
Yeah.
Promise you.
For sure. Yeah. And that just comes back to like what we just said, how you truly can build whatever skill you want to if you just dedicate yourself to it,
Yeah.
and just not leave that path and not get knocked off the path by having a bad day or a bad week or whatever, right?
And I
No,
think to
that's
bring this all around to your first question, sorry to do this to you, but that's why the mindset and the self talk is so important. Because the
for sure.
dedicating yourself to it day to day, it's the hardest thing to do. So this
Right.
stuff is so easy to talk about, but until you like hammer that idea in your mind and become that person, it's not going to happen.
No, and I think it's really important for players to understand that you're not going to be great every day. And in reality, you're going to be great like 10% of the time, right? 90% of the time is going to be you fucking it up and you just not doing
Mhm.
it that great, right? And it's the reps thing. And it's like I always tell my players or my athletes, I guess, occasionally or consistently good is better than occasionally great. I would rather have you have 4 good workouts this week than 1 amazing workout and 3 shit workouts. You know what I mean? Because like consistency over time is what's going to get you to that next level, right?
Totally. And that
I want
judgment's that thing that's holding players back. I know you have other questions to get to, but
no, that's fine.
the judgment's like the hardest thing to get over. And that's another thing I see separate players all the time is just they get rid of the judgment. So who cares if the workout was good or bad? If you showed up with the right intention and you put in the work, that's all that matters to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I hope players really like take that chunk. We're deep into the podcast, so I hope they get to this point in the podcast and they really hammer that home because I think that's a good important piece for them to understand. We touched on it a couple times there with visualization, and we've already talked about this to a degree. How can you get them out of that spiral? You know what I mean? So like say a player's in a slump, right? And you're just like it's game after game and we're talking about that self-talk about how you just have to show up every day and you have to do the things. But it's hard to show up every day when you haven't scored in 20 games. You know what I mean? How are
Yeah.
you how are you approaching that with players?
I mean, one thing I try to get guys and girls to do is focus on the things you want, not the things you don't want. So oftentimes when players get into a slump, it's like, oh, I can't score, or I missed that chance, or that game sucked. All right, let's forget about that. Like we got to once again. That's where the self awareness comes in to realize, okay, I'm doing this again. And oftentimes I've worked with players for years that like they'll get on the phone. I'm like, you know, you're doing it again, right? They're like, damn, I didn't even realize I was doing it again. I'm like, you're doing it again. We don't. Who cares about that? Learn the lesson from whatever that was. Let's focus forward. So, what are the things you want to have happen? What are the plays you want to make? What are the goals you want to score? What's
Yeah.
the outcome of this game that you want to have? And that's the fastest way to have it happen. Focus on what you want, not what you don't want. Don't what if the negative, start to what if the positive.
Yeah. I love that.
That's
And
that's a practice.
no, it is, and not to bring it back to golf again, but this is where all my analogies come from. If you haven't figured it out yet, but it's the same thing as like you're standing on the tee box and the green is you have to go over a pond to get into the green, right? And everyone's standing on the tee box just going, "Don't hit it in the water, don't hit it in the water," and then you hit it into the water because all you were
Yeah.
thinking about is hitting it into the water. When in reality, if you're sitting there, you're visualizing that shot hit the middle of the green, and you're saying, "Just hit the green." All I got to do is put this on the green. Chances are you're probably gonna put it on the green, right?
Yeah. Or you can take it one step back from that, maybe visualize yourself hitting the green and telling yourself, just hit a good shot. Just swing the freaking club. I noticed
Right.
you swore a couple times. I'm working on my own swearing to keep it down. But yeah, back to that analogy about the golf, though, like all of my like stories about things I've learned are just kind of scrambled because I've learned too many things. My brain's just full of nonsense. But there's this story about like a flight simulator when guys are learning to fly, and they basically did this test where like they told them to focus on not hitting the building or whatever it was, the pillar, and every
Yeah.
time they hit the pillar, because that's all they're focusing on, so they end up hitting the thing. It's like you're predicting a future at the end of the day, and so you want to be predicting a future that you want, not one that you don't want.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that analogy. There's the similar one with the skier. Like if you're skiing through the
Yeah,
trees and all you see is trees, you're gonna hit a tree, right? You see the path through the trees, not the trees. So I love that. And yeah, don't worry about the swearing because I clearly
okay.
swear quite a bit. And I hate when people like I swear in real life. Like it's just kind of how I talk, and I want this conversation and podcast to come off as authentic. And if I swear in real life, well, then I'm going to swear on here. And I mean, 14-year-olds maybe listen to this, and I'm sorry if your parents are don't want you to hear swearing, but I mean that's the real world. So sorry about it. I want to talk about clutchness a little bit. We look at players. I'll bring this into the football realm because the Super Bowl just happened, and we had Patty Mahomes with his third Super Bowl, and just being clutch, Patty Mahomes in overtime, right? And
Mhm.
he's one of those guys that you can point to, and there's numerous professional athletes that you can point to that just seem to ramp it up when the pressure's on, right? Like that's when they show up. It's almost like they want that pressure. It's almost like he wanted that game to be an OT because he wanted, to make that drive and win the game. Is that something that you think players can build? Like, can you build clutchness, or is it just a trait that you have or you don't have?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say you could build it, but I would also say, and people always get annoyed with me when I say this, but I had it. Like I was not the best player on my team when I played pro or junior, but I scored some massive goals in playoffs, certain games. If you ask anybody, that's probably what they'll say about me. Slow skater, not that skilled, but like when it was time to show up, this guy would show up. And so I'm not, and I look back to try to reverse engineer that, but I think for me, I got very excited and laser focused in big games. Where the regular season, I was kind of so ho hum. I don't recommend that. But I mean, if you can get your mind locked in, I remember specifically like a game 5 playoffs, 5 game series. It was my first kind of taste of visualization and self talk. I didn't realize it at the time, but I remember just sitting in that dressing room and just towel on my head, locked in, telling myself, I'm taking over this freaking game. I'm going out there and getting it done. And I did, you know. And so I think the self belief piece goes a long way in the clutchness, and you need that proof over time. So now Patty Mahomes has a little bit of proof. So it's easier to go back to that proof and say, hey, I've done this before. I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Buffalo Bills years ago, and they kept losing the Super Bowl. I mean, it's hard to have that mindset when you keep losing. So I think I think there's a mix of both. You probably got a little bit of it in you, but you can also train yourself to be whatever you want to be. I think at the end of the day as well. But you got to
Yeah.
get your mind locked in. You got to have your self talk locked in. You can't have that wavering confidence. Like that confidence roller coaster I talk about all the time. I think affects the clutchness. Like if the
Yeah.
other team scores and you're just down and defeated, I mean, what are you telling yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And I love that tactic. And going back to what you said about just like showing up, and like it seemed like you liked to show up in the bigger games. And I always love like from psychology, because I truly believe too that you can build it. And I think what you said there, a good point is like you need to have some proof that you are clutch
Yeah,
too, right? Because it just makes it easier to be like, I am that guy, right? And I always like that kind of analogy, or I guess it's not even an analogy, it's like a theory in psychology about like the psychological arousal, that like inverted U of like you need like the right amount of arousal to really get going, but
yeah,
too much is going to crush you, too little you're not going to show up. And so I think back to your point of like being able to build clutchness, like you need to put yourself in those scenarios more often, right? So that when the big game comes, it's not like the arousal is not too much. Like you can, it's relative, right? So if you show
yeah.
up in games, that are meaningless, or you show up in games in the first round of the playoffs, when you get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, then that arousal is like just right for you to be like, all right, I'm that guy. Like, let's go win
Yeah.
this game, right?
And then always seeing yourself as that guy, whether you're there or not. Going back to that belief, you have to see yourself as a big game player. It's one of the self-talk cues I tell people to say to themselves all the time. I'm a big game player. Like I'm the guy, I'm the girl. I'm going out there to do it.
Right.
It's a lot better than going out there thinking, man, I hope I show up today. I hope I perform. That's what a lot of players are doing. I hope I have confidence tonight. Well, I mean, hope's not the best strategy. Like,
Yeah. No, and like you say, if you're gonna have an internal dialogue, it may as well be that like, I'm that player versus like,
yeah,
man, I really, really hope I can be that player. You know what I mean? No, that's awesome. Matt, I want to be super conscious of your time here. And so a closing tradition on this podcast is I love the adage that you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around with the most, right? And I truly believe that that's true. And I think in the digital age, it can be extrapolated out to you're the average of the 5 people you consume the most, who have mentored you, who you watch their YouTube videos, those sorts of things. Like the average of the 5 people that podcasts that you're listening to really become how you think and the person that you develop to be. And so I'm always interested in high performers like yourself of who those 5 people are for you, who have influenced you, have mentored you, or who you look to in times of like, I need more knowledge in this area, or whatever the case may be.
yeah, that's a great question, and I might stumble through an answer here, and maybe there'll be something in my answer. But I feel like over my years, I mean, I haven't consumed a podcast in probably 2 years. Don't watch too many YouTube videos. I went through that phase, so maybe a couple years ago, if you got me, I'd have a better answer for you. But there's people in my life. I keep my circle small, and I try to keep the people I go to for advice also small. And so there's a guy by the name of Jason Yee, Train 2.0. He's got a hockey page. I'll shout him out. My guy Mike Dobronsky, guy I've been working with for years, just a close personal friend that I talk to every single day, bounce ideas off of. A guy by the name of Jacob Newton. He played pro for a long time. over in Europe. He was a draft pick of Anaheim back in the day. He was into the mental game, long before people were into the mental game. I've learned a lot from him. Obviously, my father was a subconscious mentor of mine growing up. So those are guys I kind of turn to. I would say just on top of that, like I've also tried to like stop looking into that so much and look into myself a little bit more, if that makes sense. Maybe that's a different way to look at it and
Right.
why I try not to follow too many people, because I want to start to think for myself a little bit more. I think that's a skill other
Mm-hmm.
players have to learn as well, especially younger ones. I think we have to learn the information. Of course, there's information that needs to be learned, but at some point it's like, how does this information apply to me? And now what can I do with this information to specify it to me? And how can I make this information my own? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's what I'm trying to do. And then I use these 3 to 4 to 5 people to go to them like, hey man, what do you think about this? Then they'll just get right back to me and be like, this is what I think. And so I think the most important part about these 5 people, maybe that's a better way to answer the question, is to make sure they're people that they're not worried about hurting your feelings or, telling you some bullshit story or pumping you up. These guys just tell me like it is. Matt, that's a horrible idea. Matt, don't do that. Matt, don't do this instead of that. And I'll take that information once again, think for myself and be like, yeah, he's right. Or you know what? He's wrong. I trust myself. I'm going to do this anyways. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
got to learn a lesson there. But I think to have some straight shooters in your life, people that are actually confident in themselves and don't give a shit what other people think, those are the people you're looking for. You're not looking for people pleasers or fit in people or
Yeah.
yes people, because that's who I grew up with and that's who I was. And no one was ever like in my face saying, Matt, you're saying you want to play in the NHL, but like you're going out 5 nights a week. You're not going
Yeah.
to the gym as hard as you should be. You're not doing the things you said you were going to do. Nobody did that to me. And so I've had to learn a lot of this stuff the hard way, unfortunately. But I mean, fortunately as well, because I have learned and now I'm trying to give back to the younger players as well. And then some of the pro guys I work with that I won't maybe mention, I've learned a lot from them. Just
Mhm.
working with high performers it's eye opening because, I played junior A hockey, then I played semi-pro hockey. And so I was around some high performers, but maybe not guys at the highest of levels. And so when you start to get around those guys, I mean, they operate differently. And so if you have an opportunity to get around them, get around them. When I was
Yeah.
younger, I wouldn't do it because I was intimidated. I was afraid they're going to think I sucked, whatever. But if I just showed up around those guys, I mean, I 10x my results just by being in the room.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. There's some great names on that list, some great follows for anyone listening out there. And I think that's a great point that you brought up about not surrounding yourself with yes men, right? Like they're not going to get you anywhere. Even if they're your friends, that's awesome. Like if your friends are yes men, don't like go cutting out all your friends or nothing like that. But you definitely need some people in your life that are going to tell you the hard truths that you need to hear, whether you
Yeah.
want to hear them or not, right? And so I think that's a great point there, and a great way to end the show. I want to thank you so much for your time, Matt. You've been super gracious. Ton of good nuggets in here that I think players can draw on. If anyone who doesn't follow you, doesn't know who you are, and wants to learn more about you, wants to work with you, where can we send them?
Hockey Pro Training on Instagram, and then hockeyprotraining.com is my website. I think it's the Hockey Pro Training Matt on TikTok, which is a wild app, but yeah, if you
Yeah, I
find me
had
there, good luck.
I deleted the TikTok because it was insanity, and I was like, I don't need to be on here anyways.
Yeah,
But no,
it's a little
I
much.
love that. Thank you so much for your time. I will link all that in the show notes for anyone interested. And yeah, we'll have to get you on again. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, man. I enjoyed it.
All right, I'll stop the recording here.